Well, I hope you enjoyed those morning sessions, and I would love to hear if you have any just thoughts that you would like to share as you kind of listen to those morning sessions, things that you found were especially helpful that you might bring to just to share with the group, things, maybe questions that you had. But I'd just love to hear from you, kind of what some takeaways you had, things that you found were helpful or insightful that was shared, just to encourage one another.
I don't know about anybody else, but when I started in with Dr. Ellen on Framework 1, I was a mind of mud. I didn't know where he was going, how to follow him. And I think if I followed right, I had like a 20-minute break between Framework 1 and Framework 2. And I had to sit down and I had to pray to God, help me figure this out. He said, if I didn't get it, I wouldn't be a good biblical counselor. And so I went to Framework 2 and God is mighty, and I got it. Well, but I think I got it. We'll find out.
And so, was there a certain part of Framework 1 that you were having struggle kind of understanding?
I didn't know how to follow him.
Okay.
I was trying to go through the notes to see where he was, and it was just a mess to me. But it all made sense when he got into Framework 2, and I was really excited about Genesis, and their eyes were opened and they saw. That really hit me wonderful. So I think Framework 1 was my issues of being up at the crack of dawn, because I'm 3 hours. I was up at 5. So that might have been some of it.
Well, and that's helpful feedback though for me too, just for future hosting too, to try to maybe give some background and help just to make sure people, as they head into that session to be thinking. Good. Other thoughts, things that stood out to you that was helpful?
I struggled with it too.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, you weren't the only one. I struggled with it as well. After a while, it was like the Charlie Brown cartoon, the teacher, the rah, 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 rah. I had to kind of take a break every once in a while and go back to it. It was just too much talking for me.
Okay, good.
Was there's a specific part that was unclear, or was it just a lot of information to take in?
It was a fire hose.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a fire hose of a lot of. It was good information, mind you, but it was a fire hose of a lot of information. And for me, there was just a lot repetitive of like the same thing, but just in different variations of it. And I'm like, okay, I got your point. Move on. It was great, but yeah. So I had to take a break every once in a while and just kind of like refresh my brain.
Okay.
I think the notes didn't follow it really well either on the first part. The second part, he seemed to do a lot better clarifying of the notes of what he was saying, but in the first part, it didn't do that as well. So that kind of something.
I agree. The first session, it didn't match the notes, and the notes on his screen were much better than the notes we received.
Yes.
Hey, are you guys able to hear me from Breezeport?
Yes.
The one thing that I wanted to bring out specifically that he didn't mention, but I think is worth mentioning, is that Adam and Eve actually tried to take care of the problem themselves by covering themselves. Once they covered themselves, they still felt like they had to hide from God. So if what they had done had been enough to cover that nakedness, they wouldn't have felt the need to go hide from God in addition to that. So it's an example to us of when we try to fix things ourselves, when we try to come up with the solutions, it's not going to be enough to take care of the guilt that we feel. Only what Christ has done can take care of that guilt. And he didn't say it specifically in there because it wasn't pertaining to it, but it's something that kind of struck me as I was listening, that was an example of what we often do. We're going to fix the problem ourselves. We're going to cover ourselves, and it doesn't work.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point that you bring out, and a point that the text later emphasizes too. Who provides the garments? It's the Lord, right, who covers them. And how does he cover them, right, with animal skins? And right, so there's an implication of there's going to be death, right, and sacrifice. And I think that helps us to set us up for why are Cain, right, Adam and Eve's children, Cain and Abel, how does Abel know to offer, right, animal, right, sacrifices, right, as a herdsman? Well, probably the Lord, right? Adam is instructing, right? I mean, there's already these assumptions that are being made of, right, their blood is needed for atonement, right? Without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness, and God is going to, of course, provide that, as we follow that trajectory through Genesis, God providing the ram for Abraham. He's the one who provides the sacrifice, and him trusting to look, right, ultimately again to the lamb, God giving the instructions about the Passover lamb. It's not the Israelites who just decide, yeah, let's put the blood on the doors, but God is going to give them the way in which he's going to cover over them. And then finally, as we look to Christ, I think that's a great point, that we're clothed in the righteousness of Christ. And that's what removes the shame and the guilt for our sin. That's a great insight.
I have a question. When he was talking about anxiety and he kind of gave the world definition of fear for no apparent cause.
So Barbara, I have a hard time hearing you. Can you speak just maybe a little louder or get closer to the mic?
Yeah. I said when he was talking about anxiety.
Anxiety, okay.
He gave the definition of the world saying it's a fear for no apparent reason. And so I'm wondering, how can you unpack that for a little bit? I mean, when you're talking to a person who maybe has a lot of anxiety or kind of compulsive, obsessive type behaviors, how do you unpack that for them to get them to see that there's something behind their anxiety?
Yeah. How do I unpack that for a counselee? One, I think, I like some pamphlets that I think are helpful just on this topic. Robert Jones has one related to anxiety as well that I think is helpful but one of the things I think is helping them distinguish, right, between godly concern, right, and sinful worry, right, when you're thinking about, right, many times people, let's say, who have patterns of anxiousness, one of the challenges for them is really understanding, but these are real concerns that I have, right? And they're thinking, why is it bad that I do this? It is a common question that some people have, right? I'm concerned, why am I working so much and I'm so anxious about my work? Well, I'm concerned about my family. Is it wrong for me to be so concerned about my family and wrong for me? And I think many people are defensive on that point when it talks about anxiety. And so helping them to distinguish, okay, many times what we are anxious about can be things we're concerned about, right? That are good things that we're concerned about, our health, right? And so people who are especially anxious and maybe go to certain patterns of behavior that are, compulsive behaviors, right? To protect their health or to protect others, right? And helping them to understand, okay, there's a part of this, right, that is a good concern that we have. It's a good desire. But then to think about what are the ways, as I think about, I want this so much in my life, how do I see that actually prevents me from doing some of the other things in my life? And that's what I try to help my counselees see. So when I am worried and when I'm anxious to this degree, how does that impact, right, my marriage? How does that impact my responsibilities at work, responsibilities in the home? And the passage that I use the most for worry and anxiety is Matthew 6. 6:25 through 34, where Jesus again talks about when he talks about those who are worried and concerned, the focus is especially on God's care, right? Thinking about God's care, his thoughtfulness for your life, thinking about already what he has provided you and given to you before you ever did anything, right? Because he's concerned about you. And the more and more I help my counselees just really think about God's care and concern, and then contrast that to what they're concerned about, I think it gives them hope. You are deceived to think that you are more concerned about this than God is, right? God is way more concerned about you and your life than you are. And you like to think that by being anxious, right? I'm anxious because I have to take care of me, right? And I'm concerned about these issues going in my life that I have to go through. I'm worried that I got to make sure I take care of me. And what God is saying instead is God actually takes care of you better than you take care of yourself, right? And He
Amen.
cares a lot more about you than you care about yourself too. And I think that's to me a hope that I cling to in Matthew 6 when you look at some of those reasons that Jesus gives, right? Your body, consider your body. God gave you your body that's so complex and it's so amazing. And if He gave you this body, of course He understands that you need food, right? He designed your body. He knows right? He knows you need the food. Well, if God gave you this greater gift of your life in your body, of course you should expect, right? He's going to be able to meet the lesser things in your life, the food, the clothes, right? And as you kind of work through that passage, I find that to be the most helpful in discussing with my counselees to try to get to the root of the concerns and the anxiety and the worry. And then at the end, as you think about the kingdom of God, is to see, if we're sinfully worried, right, sinfully anxious. And I think it's important that we distinguish between just physiological feelings, my heart racing, right, there's times where my heart rate is up, right? I feel more awake, etc., between sinful concerns where I'm not pleasing the Lord as a result, or I'm responding with these feelings in a sinful way, right? And so just because I have certain physiological feelings does not necessarily mean that I'm sinning in my thoughts, right, in my desires. And that's something important that we sometimes have to distinguish, right? Right. Somebody was in a situation that brings about, right, a concerning response of danger that is a gift of God, right? And they get out of the danger and now their heart rate is up. Well, does that mean that I'm sitting in this moment because my heart rate, I feel anxious? Not necessarily, right? And so that's why we have to be careful, right? As we talk to individuals of just because I have certain physiological feelings, I need to now evaluate, okay, what do I do with these feelings? How do I respond, right? Am I thinking about truth and what honors God? Am I worried? Am I anxious in appropriate ways? Or is it leading me to neglect things that God is calling me to do as a Christian in my life right now because of I'm fearful of what people will do to me, or I'm fearful of what people will say to me, or I'm fearful of what may happen, so I'm not fulfilling my responsibilities and what God would say. And I think those are helpful things to discuss with your counselee that are helpful categories.
One other thing with that, he talked about kind of the root being the lack of love. How do you tie that to this idea of anxiety?
Sorry, was the lack of love?
Yeah, he talked about the lack of love being the root.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. Can you type the question in, just roll into the chat there? I just want to make sure I'm hearing your question right. And while Barbara's typing that question, Rex, you had a question?
Yes. You mentioned the pamphlet from Robert Jones. What's the name of the pamphlet?
It's worry. Hold on. I'll post it here in the. Robert Jones, Why Worry? Getting to the Heart of Your Anxiety. I find that to be a helpful a pamphlet I like a lot. I mean, there's some great ones on worry. David Powelson has a good one on worry, focusing on Matthew 6 as well. I like and he has worry, pursuing a better path to peace. But I'll post that here for you so you have it. Hold on one second. I typed it there so you have it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep. Barbara, did you type your question?
I did. Failed to send it.
Not seeing it there. It's in the comments. You hit enter there. Sent. Other questions from folks in Breezeport or who's joining online? You know, when as I mentioned Genesis, you know, one of the interesting details is when you look at what God says to Adam when he calls him, and when he says later, what is it that Adam trusted? He uses it's interesting that what words he uses to describe Adam's response. It says, because you they see it there? So when God holds Adam accountable, what does he say is one of the reasons for Adam's sin? Look at verse 17.
Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you.
Yeah, so meaning and that's a big theme throughout the Old Testament of listening and hearing. Or will you listen? Who do you listen to? Right? And faith being, right, we listen and we follow the word of the Lord, right? What the Lord tells us, right? And Adam, right, when God talks about the reason that Adam is being cursed, right? He says is because you listened to the voice of your wife. You cared more about what she had said. You had heard what I had said regarding the tree, right? And you shall not eat of it, right? But instead you listened to her voice, right? And you followed. But the point being, right, all of us, right, when we think about authority for our counselees, what voice you listen to is very, very important, right, for your life. Are you going to listen to your own voice, your own understanding of things? Are you going to listen to the voices of others? But God is saying we have to, right, understanding, right, wisdom and understanding is going to be coming through us listening to the Lord's voice and seeing what he wants us to see, right, regarding the things of how he has made the world for our lives. And it's only by listening, right, to his voice, trusting his authority, that we're going to come to see and understand what we ought to see about God, about his ways, and how he has made the world. And when, for example, when Adam and Eve listen, right, so when Eve listens to the voice of the serpent, right, what does she begin to see about the fruit? Yeah, that it's desirable and it's good for eating and for making one wise. And what's interesting, right, is I think we're supposed to see that starts to come, right? So she now has this perception of the fruit and what it's going to bring to her life in a way that is not true and it's not real, right? And you see where it ends up leading. They end up now experiencing the reality of what God understood, right, to be true and why this is wrong and why this is not good for eating, right? Right, and God says, this is not good. And they don't listen, right? And I think it's just a great point for our counselees. We talk about authority and what we mean by faith, right? And faith in a lot of ways is we're listening and we're trusting God's word, right? Irrespective, right, of voices that are out there, irrespective of your own voice at times. And as you do that, though, God is going to help you to see things about him, his character, his ways in this world that you would not otherwise see. Like, you have to do this in order to come to this type of understanding and knowledge about God. And so it shouldn't be surprising then when people are like, I don't understand why God tells me no in this case. And I don't understand why. Well, the whole point is, if you're not listening and you're not following God's voice, you're not going to see the beauty of God's ways and why he says the way it is. And so that's part of helping our counselees live by faith. Any other questions that you just have about counseling in general, about some of these sessions that we talked about? This is time to be questions and answers.
Can you recommend some of your favorite resources?
Recommend some of my favorite resources? Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one of my favorite articles, when I think of, let's see, I probably should go some topical here. So I love for like pre-marriage counseling, or Pastor Rob Green has an excellent pre-marriage counseling book that I use quite a bit called Tying the Knot. It's one of my favorite for pre-marriage counseling. When I think of marriage books, some of the ones that we use a lot is Wayne Mack's Strengthening Marriage. He has some great worksheets, so practical application to do from that book. You can also, I mean, there's chapters to read, of course, too, but I like some of the assignments that you can assign out to. There is Momentary Marriage by John Piper is one, too, I like to use for marriage counseling, just for reading for people who aren't so sure about, what's the purpose of marriage? Why are we getting married? I like that. It's not very long. It's pretty short, a short book. And so I can assign chapters from that. I like to use sometimes for marriage. Thinking of pamphlets, one of my pamphlets I like for those going through difficulties is Jerry Bridges' You Can Trust God. You Can Trust God by Jerry Bridges. It's a short pamphlet. Kind of an abridged version of Trusting God, the book, which is excellent. But I like that little pamphlet, You Can Trust God. And it's focusing on 3 attributes of God, specifically his love, his wisdom, and his sovereignty, his control, and just how those attributes of God really help us process suffering and to trust the Lord as we think about those 3 characteristics. So I like that a lot for, counselors going through challenges. Joni Eareckson Tada has a book on weeping. Here it's Why We Weep. It's a good for, I think, like lament. It's a good book for lament. Hold on, let me see what's the name. When God Weeps. That's it. When God Weeps. I think that's another good little booklet on. It's not super long, but again on. I like for loss, Bob Kellerman's book on grief, the Grief Share resources. If you have never had Grief Share, it's an excellent resource too. But that's something I think, especially if you're walking somebody through, Grief Share has some amazing, I think is an excellent structured book for a community, for people to walk through who are going through grief. We have a Grief Share ministry in our church, and I've just always really enjoyed those lectures. I find them to be helpful, and the gospel clearly shared at several points throughout. And but Bob Kellerman has Life's Losses. It's a Grief Share book. It's kind of, I think, somehow related to the Grief Share topics, but here it's. Yeah. And it's once again, it's about 100 pages, so it's not a huge book, and the chapters are very brief. And so that's by Bob Kellerman. I really like that for grief. For sexual morality, I find Finally Free, David, by Heath Lambert is a great resource, for that topic. So that's Finally Free by Heath Lambert is one I like to use, especially, assign chapters out of that book. And he has reflection and discussion questions at the end. That's a resource I really enjoy. For conflict resolution, we have in our track 1, for those who are just learning the basics of Peacemaker, there's Ken Sandy has some excellent resources. Through the book of Peacemaker, there's some chapters in there that you could use for conflict type resolution topics, reconciliation. We do have our lectures on 4 rules of communication from Ephesians 4 that we use in our track 1, but I use those all the time and just have them listen to the audio. And so many times for growth steps for counseling, I'll often assign track 1 lectures, right? So I'll have them listen to the role of husband and wife in track 1 that we teach, husband's role as a lover and a leader and a learner. And I often will assign those as homework for counselees to listen to those and to fill out the notes. So I have them go on our website and I have them buy the audio and buy the notes and then have them work through those together. And so that's often a homework. And then we have 50 ways to love your spouse, right, from track 1 that I often will assign those as application for homework too, is to pick 2 or 3 of those this week that you're going to apply in your marriage. So I like to, that's a common counseling assignment I will use for marriage. I like, so I'm trying to think about, forgiveness. Rob Green has a booklet on forgiveness, and it's based on Matthew chapter 18 with the parable of the unforgiving servant. That's my go-to I use for talking about forgiveness and the commitments that we make in forgiveness. And so I find that to be an excellent resource on forgiveness. If you're dealing with sexual abuse, Bev Moore, who's a counselor at our ministry, and Pam Gannon wrote a book, In the Aftermath. And that's, again, an excellent resource, very practical and helpful, I think, for those who have gone through sexual abuse to read and work through that book. I think it'd be an excellent supplementary resource as you're meeting with somebody for counseling. Is there a specific topic too, Barbara, that you're thinking about that you kind of would want a resource? I mean, I know there's so many out there, so I'm just trying to think of some common ones that you may deal with.
I pretty much get another perspective because I know Randy had shared the toolbox. I wanted to see what kind of.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of those are excellent resources that he recommends too, and some of them I'm sure that I mentioned I think are probably in that toolbox that he refers to as well. But then I like, again, is sometimes you can look in, online, whether it's the Biblical Counseling, ACBC, Truth and Love for Biblical Counseling Coalition. There's many times, people who put out blogs or articles that are published online. And so there's some gold sometimes in some blogs where I can give somebody a 3 to 4 page blog that somebody wrote about something and assign that for homework too. And so, just to kind of just think of those as other resources as you continue to get some of those. Our church, we do a counseling blog as well on different topics. And so you can go onto our website and sometime search, how do I counsel somebody with this, or search this topic, and you'll find there's quite a bit of resources we just put out there that can maybe just be helpful for a counselee to read or for you to go through as you're approaching a certain topic in preparation for your counseling. Great question. Any other questions?
I have just a comment to make. I can't let it go without saying I'm about ready to move to Florence, Kentucky, because I am just loving Pastor Bob's preaching, teaching. He really does very well for me anyway, with his excitement, his humor. He's just neat. And the things he gives us, like that checklist he does at the end of every year of counseling, what to look to for yourself. He's great.
Wonderful. Encouraging. Thanks for that. Any other questions before you guys have a little time for a lunch break and enjoying the rest of the afternoon sessions? But then, later on this afternoon, we'll have another time for summary. And I'd love to, again, if you have questions, if you're looking for resource recommendations on topic, absolutely. Just shoot me a message, or we can talk later this afternoon. I just want to be available for you to answer questions that you would have. And if you have questions too about the sessions, I want to make sure I'm trying to do my best to cover those too. All right. Well, we'll see you in a little bit then.